Hello, everyone. I'm Mark Plaster, Senior Executive Editor of Emergency Physicians Monthly, and you're listening to EP Talk, the place where emergency physicians, aka ER docs, come to talk about things that are relevant to our personal as well as professional lives. And my guest today is Christopher Catani of Hardy Diagnostics, and I came across this company, this group, because they have kind of an interesting new product for us in the COVID-19 diagnostic scheme of things. So I'll just, Christopher, why don't you kind of tell us tell us a little bit about Hardy Diagnostics, and then let's kind of dig a little deeper into the weeds of what you have to offer to the COVID-19 pandemic here.
Okay, sounds good, Mark. Well, Hardy Diagnostics is a employee-owned company, one of very few in the United States. There's only 3,000 employee-owned companies in the United States. They're called ESOPs.
Mm-hmm.
And so everyone in the company, we have about 450 people. We have two manufacturing plants, one in Santa Maria, California, and one in Springboro, Ohio, and a network of distribution centers. Our primary business is focused towards the microbiology lab.
Okay.
So that would be in the clinical space, in the pharmaceutical space, or the educational or food, anywhere where they're doing any type of microbiology.
Okay.
So we've been around for 40 years, and we manufacture about 1,800 different products for the microbiology labs. Things such as prepared culture media for culturing of bacteria.
Okay.
We also manufacture all kinds of rapid tests for the microbiology lab, and just amongst all different types of things. Anything you could think of: loops, spreaders, reagents, gram staining.
Okay.
We're one of the few companies in the world that manufacture those things. So we're really niche-y in the microbiology area, and we're quite well known.
You know, one of the things that I just before coming on the podcast, I just finished up writing a thing about preventing the next pandemic, and one of the issues actually is the fact that so little of our medical pharmaceutical capability is right here in the United States. One of our huge vulnerabilities is the fact that so much of critical materials are manufactured in China. And
or Europe, for example, with the viral transport media that everybody needs, right? You take the specimen with a swab,
mm-hmm.
put it into the viral transport media, send it to the laboratory for a PCR test.
Mm-hmm.
Well, the main company that makes those viral transport medias is based out of Italy. And there's not very many companies that make a viral transport media.
Yeah.
And the one in Italy is just swamped. They can't even come near to keeping up with the demand.
Yeah.
So when this pandemic hit, there was a huge need for viral transport media. And a bunch of people here at Hardy, we started rubbing our chins, and we were saying, you know what? We have a viral transport media that we weren't really focusing on for many years, and we actually have an FDA approval on it. Let's blow the dust off of this product and see if we can get it going. So we started making this viral transport media. We put it out there on the market, and the demand was so enormous. We went from having one machine to produce the product, to fill the tubes, to now we have 5 machines going, 3 shifts a day, and we have 5 more machines on order, 2 of which are coming in next week. Yeah. So, and yeah. that's just going to keep up with the demand that's coming in. We have states calling us and telling us we want 10 million tubes. Okay, this is one state. Okay.
Yeah.
So we've been extremely busy with the viral transport media, but at the same time, all this was happening, we were working with a company in China called AutoBio,
Right.
and we've been developing a relationship with them over the last 2 years. And so we've been over to China visiting them and so on and so forth. It's a long courtship when you're dealing with
Yeah.
Chinese companies. Trust really needs to be established. So during this whole thing, and we were building up this trust for other products that we wanted to import that they made, they they came out with an antibody test
Hmm.
for the COVID, the anti-SARS-CoV-2
Right.
antibody. So we got extremely interested in that, and so we asked for some samples. They sent us some samples. We're like, okay, so let's test it. So we brought it over to our local hospital that had a few COVID patients, and they tested it on the patients, and it was perfect correlation with the patients that were sick with the PCR test.
Hmm.
So we were like, okay, so the quality looks pretty good. So we
Hmm.
started looking at the data that the Chinese had produced and the studies they produced, and the data was extremely good. They were telling me that the specificity and sensitivity was about 99%,
Hmm.
which
Okay.
you may know is pretty dang good. It doesn't get much better than that.
Right.
So all these pieces started to fall into place. And so we asked the FDA under the emergency use authorization policy if
Hmm.
we could import it.
Okay.
They said yes. And so, but we weren't the only ones. There were many, many other companies that made similar tests that were just flooding the market under this EUA policy.
Right.
Now, the EUA policy states that you can sell the test, but it hasn't been reviewed by the FDA. So they can't really guarantee the quality of the test. It hasn't been tested by the FDA. So they let you import the test and sell it if you at the same time start working with the FDA to get an EUA official approval, which is hard to get.
Right. How
And
long does
so
that take, by the way? How long does the EUA official approval take?
it takes
What's
about it on a fast track with the FDA during this pandemic it took us about 2 months.
oh, that's
Normally it would take about a year.
okay. I started to say I was going to say a year to 18 months. That's what I had heard.
Yes, and it's a very difficult thing to do, but since they were fast tracking and expediting, putting all their people focused on these types of products, it happened a lot faster. So we got our EUA approval, and it got out, and now we have more orders again that we can handle. So we're importing this kit now from China. We have our first shipment coming in. As soon as it comes in, it's all the orders will be filled, but we'll be on back order because we need to be able to produce enough to meet the demand.
Right.
So in
What is
China, they're gearing up.
what is the demand in the United States? Are you competing with the demand in China right now? Do you have a feel for what their demand for the same product is?
Mark, that is a great question because when AutoBio learned that we were working with them to get the EUA approval, but when we got it, that's a badge of honor. That's a badge of quality that AutoBio now has for their kit. We have the exclusive in the United States and Canada.
Okay.
But of course, they have other customers around the world now that have demand for this product. So I'm sure that other countries are pulling for that demand.
Yeah.
So I'm asking AutoBio, well, how many can you allocate to the United States? And they're
Hmm.
telling us in the neighborhood of 10 million a month, 10 million tests.
Okay.
So I thought, well, that's pretty dang good. I'll
Right.
take that.
Right.
And so they'll be shipping in on a weekly basis now. And it's essentially a pregnancy test cartridge. You know, you've
Okay.
seen those kind of the lateral flow technology.
Yeah. Explain. Do you have one to show or
Yeah, I got this here. I can show you this here. Can you see
Okay.
that?
Yeah. It does look like a pregnancy test.
Yeah, and you can see it has two test wells. One is for the IgM
Mm-hmm.
antibody, and one is for the IgG antibody. So it
Yeah.
tests both at the same time, and it's got internal controls and a buffer.
Right.
And so the
You were showing me a picture of the um, actual methodology, which looks like a pregnancy test. Yeah, I can't
yes,
see it now. Yeah, actually, it's washed out. I can't see it on that
I
screen.
know. Let me
Uh,
turn off my camera and turn it back on, see if that helps.
okay, that's the
Nope, not,
same.
not
That's
really.
okay.
Hmm.
That's okay.
Okay.
Your analogy to a pregnancy test is that work. I understand that, and it looks like that. My question here is, when I was looking at the literature, it looks like these are only sold to and can be done by a CLIA lab. Is that correct? Or is this something
That,
that someone could use themselves? This looks like a product you could use you could sell in the grocery store or in the pharmacy.
Mark, that is such a great question. That's been a saga on our end.
I'll bet.
So let me tell you. So when we sent all the data to the FDA to get the emergency use authorization approval, all the data came from Chinese studies. And in the Chinese studies, they use serum or plasma, not whole blood or finger prick capillary blood.
Gotcha. Okay.
So the approval was for serum or plasma. So
Okay.
that means you have to have a moderately complex level of testing, and therefore it needs to be done by a licensed lab. It does not have, it's not CLIA waived.
Okay. Right.
So, so,
You actually
but
have to
we're
you
getting,
have to draw a tube. You have to draw a tube, spin it down, and then take the plasma, and then use that portion of it in order to do the test.
you're exactly right. So that's great for a large swath of the market, but there is also a market for say, the finger prick
Right.
type. So the data that China has collected is not robust enough on that, although the finger prick does work because we've
Okay.
tested it.
Hmm.
And they tell us it works, although we're still collecting more data so that we can resubmit to the FDA to get a new approval, thus for finger prick, which
Yeah.
will make it far easier and more readily accessible to a larger swath of the testing community.
Yeah, that was
Yeah.
one of the things that I was writing about today. I think that when we look back on this period of time and the fact that we were trying to sort people by whether they had a fever, cough, and shortness of breath, it's going to feel very Neanderthalish, that such a blunt, a blunt tool. And when people will say, "Well, why didn't you just test them for it?" Well, we didn't have a test for it, and I think that is the cornerstone of actually addressing future pandemics is the capability of doing rapid testing and having that be ubiquitous throughout the country. So I think that we've learned our lesson about uh, trying to not having a test, diagnostic test. We don't worry about the flu now because somebody comes to the door and they've got fever and a headache, and we do a flu swab, and boom, you got it. You don't have it. We treat it. We don't. What we know what we're dealing with. And
Hmm.
COVID-19 is a whole different story,
Yes.
and a whole different story. And that the fact that we can't tell exactly what we're dealing with, or we don't know, all the uncertainty creates a great deal of fear, and that fear and that uncertainty is actually fueling a lot of the anxiety that I think we feel in the country. If we just knew what we were dealing with, if we had 50 million tests out there readily available, and we could tell, nope, this is how many we have, this is the real case fatality rate, you'd be able to, we wouldn't be guessing. And I
Hmm.
think that the level of anxiety would be tremendously diminished. And I think that hopefully we've learned our lesson for future pandemics. So
Yeah,
um,
I certainly hope so.
Yeah,
I certainly hope so.
I hope that the
You,
cycle, obviously, this works for SARS-2, COVID-2, 19. This is not going to be the last virus that we see. This is, we're going to see more and more, just like we see seasonal flu, I think. And I think that this is going to be something that we need to have anticipated and have the testing capabilities. This and not 6 weeks or 8 weeks or 12 weeks into the pandemic finally have the testing capability. So I think you're on the cusp of something that is could keep you very busy for a very long time.
yeah, I think so too. And there's a place for this kind of testing, I believe, and I'm sure you understand this, being an ER doctor, is that with a PCR test or an antigen test,
Hmm.
um, that'll tell you if you have the antigen of the virus, right? But it doesn't tell you. It tells you if you have an active infection,
Correct.
but it doesn't really tell you if you've been exposed and maybe have built up immunity or you develop that active immunity. So this test has a place. I think. Well, let me give you a story. In January, I came down with the worst cough, worst cough I ever had. This is before anyone was talking about COVID.
Hmm.
And I called my doctor. My doctor told me, "Oh, there's this bronchitis going around, right?
Yeah.
And you're just going to have to tough it out, and it's going to be 6 weeks, and it's just the way it is." And I said, "What about antibiotics?" No antibiotics. She wouldn't
Yeah.
give me antibiotics. So, and I was fine with that, but I recovered, and then about a month passes, and this COVID thing happens, and I'm thinking, you know what? I had the symptoms of COVID. And I happen to have some of these lateral flow antibody test samples in my office. So, of course, I did the finger prick on myself and I tested myself and I came up negative for IgG antibody, which is the long term immunity antibody.
Right.
And I was convinced that I had it.
Hmm.
And now I know, no, I didn't have it. But it takes that question mark out of your brain, right?
Right. Right.
Now at least you know that
Right.
you haven't been exposed, you're still susceptible, or if you were sick and you were kind of, say you were one of these mildly symptomatic people that don't get terribly sick, wouldn't it be nice to know if you built up the antibodies so that you could safely go back to work?
Yeah, and exactly. I was listening to a podcast the other day about someone who was a factory owner was saying, why can't we just test everybody and then all the people who are positive just go back to work? Go back and live your life. You're not going to get sick. Okay, you've
Hmm.
already had it. You've developed antibodies. You got and you can go about your life. But right now we don't have the availability, the widespread availability of that kind of testing. Well, now we do.
Well, a lot of companies, like larger companies, are coming to us and saying, we want to buy, 50,000, 100,000 tests.
Hmm.
And we say, well, you're not really, do you have a CLIA lab, licensed lab on your facility? And they go, no. And we go, well, then you really can't be doing this. But to their credit, they had done their homework. They knew
Right,
that. And what some companies are doing is they're contracting out with local
right,
laboratories to actually
right,
perform the tests for them. They buy the kit,
right.
send it over to this local lab, and then they send all their people to get tested. And
Right.
even more wealthy companies are actually setting up labs to do it in their facilities.
Sure.
Some of these
Uh,
billion-dollar a year companies. It's
oh yeah,
amazing how people adapt and overcome.
yeah, yeah, exactly. Have buy the CLIA lab. Hey,
Exactly.
put a satellite CLIA lab in your Tesla factory or your your GM plant.
Hmm.
Um, so yeah, because that's absolutely the key. And I raised an issue earlier, and um, I want to talk to you about you're a company that does this that manufactures these tests. Is
Mhm.
there a possibility that you will ever do this, manufacture this test in this country?
Well, doing lateral flow tests is not an easy thing. Of course, as you know, probably from medical school, um, you have to produce the antibodies in a rabbit, right? Then you have to remove the serum from the rabbit. You have to separate the antibodies from the serum, which is very complicated. Then you have to test that antibody against the antigen and see if it has good affinity
Right.
to that antigen. And then once you have the antibody, then you have to be able to spray it onto a strip of litmus paper, essentially,
Hmm.
so you can start um, building these tests. And then you have to put it into a cartridge, build in a internal controls. It's a complicated thing.
Yeah,
It's
yeah, I can
old tech.
imagine.
Yeah, it's old technology. It's not like there aren't people that know how to do it. There are lots of people that know how to do it. It's just a matter of, are you going to do it?
Right.
And are you
What?
going to invest millions of dollars to get scaled up?
Yeah. No, I mean, I completely understand what you're doing as far as, you going to the people who are already doing it and importing it. And I understand that. I'm just simply saying that I think it's in our best interest to be able to do this eventually in this country. I'm not undermining anything that you're doing. It's just
Mhm.
I think that I hope that we eventually will be able to be manufacturers of these tests rather than simply importers.
Yes, and that's exactly, Mark, what we're doing. We've had several of our R&D specialists training on how to do all those things I just described.
Yeah.
And we've also invested in the equipment. Um, so we're getting to a point where in maybe a year we'll be able to produce these ourselves,
Interesting. Okay.
and then buy the equipment to scale up and do a variety of different tests, not just for COVID or whatever,
Yeah.
but whatever might be coming down the pike in the future. Or if we see a need, we can develop one for, say, Campylobacter,
Right. Yeah, sure.
that kind of thing.
Gotcha. Okay. Well, Christopher, thank you. You've any saved rounds here? Any final things to tell our listeners about Hardy Diagnostics and about the diagnostic test you have? Did I cut you off too soon?
No, no, not at all. I mean, there's really not that much to say. It's a pretty simple technology, but it's tried and true. It works. It's next week we'll have it in stock. We'll be shipping it out. It'll be readily available, and I'm glad that we can do our part in helping.
Good, good. And so all our listeners, I hope that you'll take a minute and look up Hardy Diagnostics on the internet. Interesting, as when I was doing my research for the podcast, I found that all the different things Christopher was talking about that they actually do, and it's interesting that a lot of that is done right here in the United States. I'm all for that, even though right now it's being imported. Hopefully, very soon, more and more of our capability will be homegrown. So, Christopher, thank you for joining me. And for all our listeners, thank you for joining EP Talk.
Thank you, Mark.